Hello and welcome to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Assertitude. On this show, we look at the ways leadership is evolving in our world and share stories from the most brilliant private equity executives, CEOs, thinkers, and doers defining our times. I'm Linnea Jongnelius, Global Head of Marketing and Strategy at Assertitude. Today, I've got Ben Gaw with me, who is the co-founder and investment committee member and head of portfolio operations at Cross Rapids Capital, a private equity firm focused on middle market industrials and services companies in North America. In this fascinating chat, we cover Ben's personal journey from working in some of the largest private equity firms in the world to co-founding his own fund, what's next for the operating partner role, and the sweet spot for private equity, the middle market. So excited to have you here, Ben. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Linnea.
Ben, the middle market represents 2/3 of total US PE deal value. And as you set up to form Cross Rapids Capital, I'm curious, what did you find attractive about this market in particular? And what was the white space you looked to fill?
I don't know if you're old enough, but there's a song by the Byrds titled Turn, Turn, Turn. The song basically says, everything changes and there's a time to every purpose. And so it's always about timing, and after having spent over a decade at, very large PE firms, the time seemed right, and if I didn't do this, I would always wonder. The founding partners of the firm all started out at very large PE firms that, of course, were once upon a time small, but have since grown to become mega funds. For example, I joined Platinum when they were still investing out of Fund 2, which seems so long ago. And that was, $2.5-2.75 billion, I think, of committed capital. Sounds big, but they were still solidly middle market. They're currently investing out of Fund 5, which is worth $10 billion, I think. And looking at their most recent press releases, doing essentially very large cap deals. And then the next firm I joined, Advent, has an even bigger fund. They were investing out of Fund 10 when I joined, which is $25 billion in committed capital. Large cap deals, in my opinion, are a lot more competitive with significantly higher entry multiples. So when my current colleagues called me back in 2020-21 to gauge my interest in starting a new PE firm, focus on the lower middle market, I didn't hesitate. I mean, it's small and medium-sized businesses are still the backbone of this country. There are thousands of companies that are founder-owned and managed, and where a PE firm will be their first institutional investor when the owners start looking to diversify their family balance sheets. So, I mean, it's an exciting space. Out of the 3 current platform deals we have, one is, we acquired from the founders. And it's pretty exciting, right? Because when you're the first institutional investor, I think from a value creation standpoint, the sky's the limit.
I can hear that you're having a lot of fun with it. And going out on your own, I imagine, is both incredibly rewarding and also a lot of work, which I know you're not one to back away from. Walk us through that decision to pivot out on your own after spending close to a decade with the large funds you described, Advent and Platinum. And what's that experience been like?
So I consulted with my very supportive wife, Fran, I talked with a few colleagues. And then the other factor was the team fit. One of my co-founders was head of industrials at Centerbridge. The other one started her career at Centerbridge and then moved on to Carlyle's middle market fund. Both extremely smart, very high integrity, believed in ops as a key enabler and differentiator. Basically, we are a team that can do traditional buyouts and challenging deals like carve-outs, stand-ups, distress, debt for control. So that's, I think, what made this firm, the team that I joined and the firm we started, basically pretty exciting. And it's been fun. People that I used to work for, they always ask, so how's it going? And I think it's been fun. It's been challenging. Especially the first few months, maybe the first year, right? Trying to get the firm off the ground. I'm now sure I've had the same sleepless nights that every entrepreneur must have felt in the early years of their venture. But we're doing very well at this point.
Yeah.
We're still in the first inning, though, so a long ways to go.
Speaking of timing, let's go back in time for a second. I think it was 2012 when we pulled you into your first operating partner job, Ben. That was a time when it was a relatively new role, and I would say it was rare for us to pull an operating partner from one fund into the next. Today, that makes you one of the few operating partners who is both incredibly experienced and who's been through several funds and several cycles. Talk us through how you've seen the role evolve over your decade in the industry.
Yeah, so I remember that day when Kevin O'Neill called to talk about the opportunity at Platinum. I don't
Mm,
think it took much convincing, to be honest. But to answer your question, I don't think the operating partner role has changed much over the last
mm,
10 years. But I think the deal landscape most definitely has. In my opinion, one of the biggest changes has been driven by entry multiples.
mm.
So much more capital today than 10 years ago, chasing, you know, probably the same, maybe more deals, but certainly the amount of dry powder has increased a lot faster than the availability of deals. So entry multiples have increased significantly over the last 10 years. So I think 10 years ago, an undermanaged or mismanaged lower middle market company would have been priced in the 4 to 6 times EBITDA range if it's a platform. And that same deal would probably go for 7 to 8 times today. So it's a big increase. A large cap company now would go for the low teens or higher if it's perceived to be a high growth investment. So this means it's harder to achieve multiple expansion in general when it's time to exit the investment. It's like less margin for error, financial engineering, or just inorganic growth or M&A is not enough to deliver a great return. So the operating partner's job has not changed per se, but it has become a lot more challenging. You still need to build great management teams, for example, that can grow organically, operate efficiently, integrate bolt-on acquisitions. So all that stuff I think remains the same, but the environment has become a lot more pressure cooker, probably driven more by, to a large extent, by the much higher entry multiples for deals.
You're looking ahead and at the conditions in the market that you just mentioned. What do you think is next for the function or the deal landscape?
I don't think the job in its core is going to change. I think of it in terms of what makes an effective operating partner. So, I probably think of it along 5 axes or dimensions. The first one is helping make sure that their fund, their PE firm, is making the right investment decisions, which means being active in the due diligence process, and giving deal teams insight around the potential strength or lack thereof of the incumbent management teams, and identifying and developing potential levers that can be pulled to grow EBITDA. So a lot of that, I think, begins to form during the diligence stage. The second part is ensuring that we have the right management teams. And so evaluating the existing team, identifying gaps, working with recruiters or your network to search and attract the right talent. I believe that is sort of, in a way, the most important job of an operating partner, because you can't do everything. And without the right management team, you're sunk. The third dimension is, what most operating partners focus on is having the right plan of attack, also known as the value creation plan.
Mm-hmm.
And this is partly where the art of being an experienced operating partner comes in, is that you can sell that to management teams. Because unless the operating partner is taking on the CEO job himself or herself, which happens, management has to execute. And in order for them to execute well, they have to believe in it. So if they don't, your value creation plan will never get executed. This is sort of operating partner 101, which is not always obvious to those who come from the world of management consulting, because in management consulting, you typically write a report and then move on to your next client. In the world of private equity, the sexiest strategy is not worth the paper it's printed on if management cannot deliver it.
Yeah.
And in order for them to deliver it, they have to believe in it, right? The fourth sort of dimension of being a good operating partner is, hitting on the right growth and optimization levers. And the fifth and last one is most important. If you do the above four right, you should deliver quantifiable results. And by quantifiable, I mean it shows up in the P&L and not soft savings in some KPI chart. I've had many partners' eyes glaze over, right? Deal partners' eyes glaze over earlier in my career while talking about, manufacturing efficiency improvements, for example, where the improvements were intangible. Soft savings matter, of course, but hard savings is probably what your PE colleagues, deal colleagues really care about. So when we talk about the direction of the operating partner landscape, everything is a derivative, I think, of the above five, right? For example, digitization and AI, great buzzwords, right? It's everybody's talking about
Yep.
digitization has kind of been around for a while, but AI is fairly new. I've been asked by my colleagues, how can AI help our portfolio companies be more effective? Heck, how can AI help our deal teams be more effective, right?
How'd you know I was going to ask you that later?
I'm not sure I have the answer because it's still in the very early stages. And I think people are still trying to figure it out. But I think I have an idea of where it could head in a few years.
Hmm.
But, I think the point I was driving at is to me, these words or like, digitization or AI or e commerce, they only matter if it helps the company deliver something tangible and measurable, right? So, can it help a portco reduce costs by becoming more efficient? Can it help them enhance their customers' experience, hence making them less likely to churn
Mm.
or help the company acquire new customers? So, I hire specialists, a lot of operating partners do because we don't know everything. But for me, it starts and ends with what am I getting for my investment?
Yeah, that's a great approach. And I love that hit list of 5 points that you had. I want to ask you about number three around management teams and drill down just for a quick second, because obviously that's so relevant to the work we've done together on the executive recruiting side. Tell me a little bit about the management team assessment process, sort of from diligence to the point of the deal and post deal. What's most important to you and just how you work to make sure that you have the right team in place?
Great question. What has worked for me, which is part of the Cross Rapids capital operating model, is to embed into our portfolio companies. Now, some operating partners think that they can manage by Zoom or conference call. Spreadsheets and KPIs, while important, are no substitute for spending time on the ground, interacting with all levels of the portfolio company. So, in essence, that's how I make sure we have the right team in place. So during the time that I'm embedded, I get to know not just the CEO and his direct reports, but even mid-level and rank and file employees. There's one bolt on in particular that we did where a forklift driver just approached me out of the blue and started talking about things he thought that the new owner should work on to improve the business, which I thought was amazing at the time, and I still do. I have a fairly good idea in about a month or two who are sort of the A players, who are the B players. Now, it's worth noting that every company needs B players. There's no such thing as a company full of A players. It's not realistic and too expensive. So, ultimately, what you want to make sure is you're cultivating the right balanced team. In Cross Rapids' case, the founding partners have all over 50 years of combined private equity experience. We have extensive list of people who we've worked with and who enjoy working with our hands-on and collaborative style and who have delivered successful exits. These executives are typically our first go-tos. In fact, I always joke with Kevin O'Neill, who's the co-founder and managing partner of Assertitude, that as Ben the closer, I can deliver a great long-term wealth creation with Cross Rapids Capital pitch like no other. The biggest obstacle to former executives is always relocation. So you do wind up having to do searches. And when we do these searches, I tend to work with a small group of recruiters like Assertitude that I've built trust and relationships with.
Let's talk a bit more about people. Teamwork, I know, is a core value at Cross Rapids, just like it is at Assertitude. And I'm curious, what are some of the practices you've put in place, in addition to spending time on site, like you mentioned, to build that early alignment and to build the trust with owners and management teams, particularly because you're working with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs in the lower middle market. How do you keep that active engagement through the duration of the partnership?
I think the key to teamwork is to over communicate and build consensus. I say this with a caveat because you cannot be a victim of analysis paralysis. For example, doing deck work over and over or running never ending spreadsheet models to try to win people over. At some point, you just have to execute. This is probably a good segue into the fact that there are generally two kinds of PE firms, which you know because you work with a lot of PE firms of all different stripes. By the way, within these two types of PE firms, there's a continuum. There are no absolutes, but for discussion purposes, we'll assume that there's just two, right? In one type of PE firm, the operating partner role is primarily to advise deal teams and portfolio company management teams, and that's the extent of it. So I think of those operating partners as internal consultants. And then you have the other kind, which is the very hands on PE firm, where the operating partner is expected to lead the value creation agenda. This is exemplified by our approach at Cross Rapids Capital, where, as I mentioned earlier, operating partners embed with portfolio companies and in some cases act as even chief transformation officers. In rare cases where there's an opening that's particularly tough to fill, which has happened a couple of times in my career, they can take on interim management roles. So in both cases, operating partners as internal consultants and operating partners as doers, consensus and buy-in is needed. But there's a difference between what consensus and what buy-in is needed when you're in a consulting advisory role versus when you are in leadership and execution role. In the former case, you definitely need to over communicate and you definitely need to get buy-in because that's the only way you can get anything done. In a firm where you have a leadership or execution role, you want to get buy-in because, of course, that's what greases the wheels. If you don't get universal buy-in, though, especially if it's in a crisis situation, you ultimately must execute anyway, since you can only spend so much time, as I mentioned earlier, writing decks or doing analysis to build a case. So as an operating partner, the type of PE firm you work for determines to a large extent what you can do. Additionally, as everybody knows, there are two major stakeholder groups in every PE firm. You have the PE deal teams and the CEO and the portco management teams. Of course, there are other stakeholders, right, such as employees, customers, and suppliers, but I'm just focusing on the first two. These two groups require different levels of transparency and engagement. With your PE colleagues, regardless of the type or nature of private equity firm, it's important to always be fully transparent. Issues and potential issues need to be communicated well in advance, with mitigation plans developed and ideally already in place. A corollary to this is that an operating partner is also expected to provide deal teams candid feedback on company performance and even CEO and management team performance. The universal truth in the private equity industry, and I'm a victim of this as well, is we tend to fall in love with management teams. We spend weeks or months together in the trenches as a deal that's working its way towards a close. But as an operating partner, you must maintain a certain level of detachment because part of your job is evaluating situations and people objectively. Once a deal closes, the dynamic of the relationship between the PE firm and the management team sort of changes anyway. It helps that management team are your friends that you have some personal relationship with. But once, a deal closes, it's all ultimately about performance and results. And in many ways, it's up to the operating partner as the primary tip of the private equity spear to provide unbiased, positive or negative feedback supported by facts. Ultimately, I guess everybody must be on the same page for a company to be successful, and communication and buy-in are critical.
That's a really good point you bring up about kind of falling in love with the management teams. And we see that quite a bit. And we hear a lot actually out of the human capital operating partner function.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're doing a assessment of the team and sometimes they struggle and sort of everybody knows that a person needs to go. Do you have any advice for those folks in terms of influencing a quick decision there so that, 12 months from now, inevitably that person fails and now we're doing the search, 12 months from now versus at the point of the deal. Is that something you've seen happen before and any advice there?
Yeah, so it's a tough dance, I think, because an operating partner who's engaged obviously sees well in advance before everybody else if a certain leader is not performing. If the culture of the PE firm is such that it's more hands on and operational, where the operating partner is expected to be a leader and to take point in executing, then it's easier to make those personnel decisions. In a case where the operating partner is in an advisory role, then you need to build the case, right?
Mm,
In that case, you need to build facts and data. You almost have to wait for that executive to fail in order for you to have a case to make a replacement. And I've seen both cases. You're a victim sort of the type of PE firm you work for.
great advice. Let's pivot a little bit. I'd love to get into a case study. One of the defining strategies of the middle market and value creation there is add ons. And I'd love it if you could walk us through a platform build that you've worked on. What was the investment thesis? How did you win the bid? And how did you get to work and deliver a successful exit?
Yeah, maybe before I answer that question, I do want to point out that, as you said, PE firms are ultimately in the business of buying and selling companies. So we don't make money if we're not doing either. Just about every deal has an M&A component as part of its investment thesis. Does it happen all the time? No, because you're in a proprietary deal. Because usually for add-ons, a lot of them are proprietary, where the seller has not necessarily committed to selling the business. So you're a victim of what's available, number one. And number two, whether sellers are interested, and their level of interest fluctuates typically. They may initially be good with selling their business and then later on in the process change their mind, or vice versa. They may initially say no, but you keep working it and later on they change their mind. So, especially in founder or owner led businesses, I think for institutional or sponsor owned businesses, that's less the case. But if it's a founder or owner led business, which we tend to do a lot because we are in the lower middle market, especially for bolt ons, you do have that emotional complication. So I remember a prior deal where courting the seller took several years. And from the time we closed the platform, we reached out to this potential, add-on. And, a few years later, the owner still, yeah, I'm interested. And one day, and then no, I'm not the other day. And in that specific case, there were at many points, we just wanted to give up. It's not worth it, right? And so you're a victim of that emotional attachment where, this company is frankly their baby. They started it, decades ago, and it's hard to let go. But probably one of my earlier very successful deals was a distribution roll up. That was the investment thesis. We made a lot of operational improvements, of course, because we always do, but we knew we needed M&A to scale quickly. We made 4 bolt-on acquisitions over a 3-year period. We could have done more, frankly, because it was a very fragmented space, but the deal team decided at the 3-year mark, more or less, that it was a good time to exit. So that was an example of a great deal. It certainly exceeded my expectations, especially given the pace and our ability to integrate in a very, very fast way.
Any key learnings or takeaways from that experience that you think would be helpful to other people in the space looking to do what you've done successfully?
So I've done many bolt-ons in my career. As I said, if I think back on, the dozen plus deals I've worked on, almost every single one, we made at least one bolt-on. And so for me, the key learnings happen on the less successful ones. You tend to not learn much when it's very successful, and you tend to learn a lot when it doesn't really go your way. And, my definition of relative failure is probably less synergistic than expected. So, that's where I would probably define my learnings. There are probably 3, 4 major types of synergies that I look for. If it's a distribution business, looking at the example I just gave earlier, adjacent geography is a key synergy. If your business is based on the West Coast, for example, it doesn't make sense to do a bolt-on the East Coast with nothing in between. So geography is an important one. If it's any kind of business, whether it's distribution or manufacturing, you're looking for operational synergies, which take in the form of, footprint rationalization or procurement opportunities, especially if you're buying the same raw materials. You're always looking for that procurement savings. In any type of business, you're looking for revenue synergies. So that could take the form of new products or services that you can now cross-sell to your customers and that bolt-ons customers, pricing opportunities, let's say. So you look for these sort of major hits, and the less successful ones, they don't pan out as you expected. Maybe because competitors react in a different way, suppliers react in a different way, customers react in a different way that you were expecting, or you realize you can't close one facility for various reasons. So those are the ones where the learnings takes place in the less successful ones.
As we all know, it's a demanding job and a demanding space in general to work in. I'd love to know, how do you keep your energy up, your focus sharp, and kind of keep that discipline in your daily life to make sure that you're operating at your best? And is there anything you do to also move your leadership skills forward so that you're continuing to evolve and grow?
I think leadership should be, about telling people the truth. I think it should be trying to put yourself in other people's shoes so that you can influence them based on what motivates them. When you're trying to sell a vision or a plan, you need to put yourself in their shoes and like what's in it for them. Otherwise, how can you influence them
Mm-hmm.
to go above and beyond versus just going through the motions? Which is why the saying, don't let a crisis go to waste. Good crisis go to waste exists because one of the best ways to motivate people and get them to go over, beyond what is needed is when there's a moment of crisis, right? When the existence of a company is at stake, then people tend to pull together and do what they need to advance the situation. And I think, leadership is about genuinely caring about people. And caring takes many forms, right? So when you have a company that's not doing well financially, so now you have to lay people off, right? Somebody might say, well, that's not caring. But from my perspective, that is caring because I'm trying to preserve the jobs of the people who are within the company. And you're letting go of people that are probably less needed. Maybe they're in a function that's going to be eliminated. Maybe they're in a force ranking. They didn't perform as well as some of their colleagues. So for me, it's as a leader, you have to tell the truth. You have to make hard choices, and letting people go may not seem like an act of caring to the people that are being let go, but it is an act of caring for the company itself and its various stakeholders, right? Keeping the company in business allows it to continue serving its suppliers, continue serving its customers, continue serving its employees, and everything else. So that's sort of my definition of caring, right? But
Yeah.
you do have to care and treat people well and fairly.
Mm.
So for me, that's sort of leadership. And how do I keep it sharp? It's basically by practicing it every day, always telling the truth to the best of my ability, which doesn't mean, you give stakeholders different levels of access to the truth, right? Because, there's certain truths that probably doesn't make sense for a forklift driver to know, but always being honest in your interactions. I think that's important. As an example, providing always honest and candid feedback. As you know, I'm a very direct person. People who work with me and for me generally know where they stand. And I think that's an important part of being a leader and certainly an important part of who I am.
You're coming at it sort of from that population health perspective,
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Is there anything that also you personally draw inspiration from, like books, podcasts, quotes, people, anything that you would call out there?
Yeah, I'm probably a bad example. I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day. But other than that, I have not read a book in probably 10 to 15 years. So I'm a very bad example. I do remember the last book I read called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. I don't know if you know it.
I'm not that one, although I am an avid reader, so I'll have
Yeah,
to
you
add it
should
to the
you should add
list.
that to your list. It's about how the happenstance of geography led to the rise of civilization. So race and
Mm.
culture has nothing to do with why certain societies advance more or faster than others. It's a very fascinating read, backed by a lot of research. A book though that I would like, especially for people involved in manufacturing. I'm actually surprised how many manufacturing guys have not heard of the book. It's called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt.
Mm.
I first read it probably decades ago, and I still remember the title, and I still remember the author because I buy the book by the dozen at
Yep.
Amazon, and I liberally hand it out to portfolio management teams, especially those that are in manufacturing. It's a very easy to read. It's very thin, but after you read it, you'll be an expert in lean flow. It's a light bulb moment. It's probably the best book, in my opinion, around how to make companies in general efficient.
Ooh, that's great. We'll have to add it to an onboarding package of
Yeah,
some sort. Yeah, for our
it's a
work in
very
the
good book.
industrial manufacturing space.
Yes.
I'm going to hit you with a quick lightning round. I promise it will be fun. If you could please fill in the blanks. Purpose is.
Purpose is, I think, the engine that drives us forward to fulfilling our goals or reaching our destiny. If you believe in such things, I believe having a purpose beyond oneself is required to be successful. I'll feel sorry for you if you feel or you believe you don't have any purpose. I think we all have one, and I think discovering one's purpose is part of the journey. And once you discover that purpose, I think life becomes more fulfilling. And so I've
Mhm.
always told my children, I love what I do. I don't think it's work. And that's partly because I think I have found my purpose.
Leadership is.
Leadership is, when I think of leadership, I sometimes confuse it with charisma, which is
Mhm.
not the same.
Yeah.
But, it's sort of, I think, this sort of energy that allows one to steer a group. It's a hard word to define, but, it's sort of this intangible sort of, for the Star Wars fan, it's sort of the force, right? That allows you to sort of lead people.
I love Star Wars. I have 3 brothers and a dad, so I've been through every Star Wars movie that there is.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing.
Success is.
Success is leaving a legacy behind. The best legacy, in my humble opinion, is your children, if you have any and you raise them well. I think the jury's still out on mine. So, but I hope they become good, successful people. And for me, ultimately, that's what will define my success or the lack thereof.
3 adjectives. Brilliant leaders are.
Brilliant leaders are intellectually curious. They're empathetic. They care about people, and they're action or results oriented.
I perform at my best when.
I perform at my best when I'm in a challenging situation. To be clear, I don't create chaos, but I enjoy creating order when there is none, especially when there is a time crunch element to the situation. So I always look back in my Alex partner years, and that those have been some of my most fulfilling because of the nature of the projects I was involved in, which were, for the 5 years I was there, universally very challenging situations at very troubled companies.
Thank you to Ben Gaw, Head of Portfolio Operations at Cross Rapids Capital, for joining us on today's episode. And thanks to you, our listeners. That's it for this episode of the Brilliant People Podcast. I'm Linnea Jungelius. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show, and follow Assertitude on LinkedIn for the latest insights on how to lead and perform at your best. Until next time, stay brilliant at work.